This message found you because your consciousness is undergoing what mystics call ego death while living, a profound dissolution of your previous identity structure that happens when your awareness reaches frequencies too elevated for your old self-concept to survive. Right now, as you read these words, there's an irreversible process unfolding where the version of yourself that has carried you this far is literally dying, and a completely new identity is being born from the quantum field of infinite possibilities. The fact that you're here, feeling magnetically drawn to understand what's happening to your sense of self, means the death process has reached critical stage. This isn't psychological breakdown or spiritual crisis. This is consciousness evolution in its most profound form. The person you used to be, with all their limitations, fears, and learned patterns, is dissolving to make space for the authentic you that has been waiting lifetimes to emerge. You've been selected by cosmic intelligence because you carry what consciousness researchers call the metamorphosis gene, the rare capacity to survive complete identity dissolution without losing your essential awareness or ability to function in physical reality. Most people's consciousness would fragment completely under this level of self-transformation. But you've been systematically prepared through your entire journey to navigate the death of who you thought you were. Your consciousness has been building toward this identity death through every limitation you've outgrown, every belief system you've transcended, every moment when your previous self-concept felt too small to contain your expanding awareness. The confusion about your identity lately, the sense that you don't recognize yourself anymore, the feeling that your previous life belongs to someone else. These aren't signs of losing yourself. They're evidence that your false self is dying so your true self can be born. The cosmic timing of encountering this information isn't coincidental. Your higher self has been orchestrating synchronicities to bring you to this exact moment of recognition because the death process requires conscious understanding to complete successfully. Without this awareness, identity dissolution can feel terrifying and disorienting. But with proper recognition, it becomes the most liberating transformation possible for human consciousness. Think about your recent experiences. Have you been feeling like you're living someone else's life? Like your previous goals and desires don't resonate anymore? Like you're watching your old patterns and reactions from a detached perspective, as if they belong to a character you used to play but no longer identify with? These aren't signs of depression or disconnection. These are symptoms of identity metamorphosis. But here's what makes this moment both extraordinary and irreversible. Once the death of your old self reaches completion, you cannot go back to who you used to be. The identity structure that has defined you for years or decades will be permanently dissolved, replaced by an authentic self that operates from entirely different frequencies, capabilities, and understanding of what's possible for your life experience. The quantum field operates according to laws that transcend ordinary personality development. When consciousness reaches sufficient expansion, it triggers what physicists call spontaneous symmetry breaking, a phase transition where the old identity structure collapses and reorganizes itself around new possibilities that were previously incompatible with your former self-concept. Your identity death isn't just personal transformation. It's cosmic intelligence shedding limiting personas to express itself more authentically through your consciousness. Every person who completes this metamorphosis contributes to raising the baseline identity frequency for the entire species, making authentic self-expression more accessible to everyone ready to transcend learned limitation patterns. Right now, as you feel this recognition penetrating your awareness, something unprecedented is occurring in your identity field. The dissolution process that has been building in your consciousness is accelerating in response to conscious acknowledgement, creating the final breakdown of artificial self-concepts that will birth the person you were always meant to become but never had permission to embody until now. You know that eerie feeling of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back at you, not physically but energetically? as if you're seeing someone who looks like you but feels like a stranger. Most people dismiss this as stress or temporary confusion, but you've learned to recognize it as evidence of identity dissolution, where your consciousness is literally becoming too expanded for your previous self-image to contain or define. Your relationship with your own thoughts has fundamentally shifted lately. Instead of feeling like the thinker generating thoughts, you've begun observing thoughts as temporary visitors in your awareness, some belonging to your old self, some emerging from expanded consciousness, some seeming to come from collective fields rather than personal mental activity. This detachment from thought identification is a clear sign that your old identity is releasing its grip on your awareness. The most profound validations come through what you might call personality displacement experiences. Moments when you respond to situations with wisdom, compassion, or capability that seems to come from someone much more developed than your previous self-concept. You hear yourself speaking words that surprise you with their depth, making decisions that reflect values you don't remember consciously developing, or handling challenges with centeredness that your old self never possessed. Your memories of past experiences have taken on a strange quality. They feel like stories about someone else rather than events from your own life. When you think about previous relationships, career phases, or personal struggles, there's emotional distance, as if you're remembering a character from a movie rather than your own lived experience. This memory detachment occurs because your expanding consciousness no longer resonates with the identity that lived those experiences. Sleep and dream patterns have become intense laboratories for identity transformation. You might experience dreams where you're completely different people living entirely different lives, or wake up feeling like you've been worked on by invisible intelligences during sleep states. Sometimes you wake with new knowledge, abilities, or perspectives that seem to have been downloaded overnight, suggesting that identity reconstruction is happening during altered consciousness states. Your emotional responses to previously triggering situations have changed dramatically without conscious effort on your part. People, circumstances, or challenges that used to generate intense reactions now feel neutral or even compassionate. This emotional detachment isn't numbness, it's evidence that your new identity operates from frequencies where old trigger patterns simply don't exist. Physical sensations accompany this identity dissolution. Feelings of emptiness in your chest, where your previous sense of self used to reside. Energy moving through your system in patterns that feel like cellular reorganization, or moments when you feel transparent, as if your solid sense of selfhood is becoming permeable. These aren't concerning symptoms, but natural effects of consciousness expanding beyond its previous identity containers. The strangest confirmations come through other people, responding to you as if you're a different person entirely, even when you haven't consciously changed your behavior. Some individuals seem drawn to seek your guidance or share intimate concerns, sensing wisdom in your presence that wasn't available before. Others feel uncomfortable around you without being able to explain why, as if your expanding identity triggers recognition of their own limitation patterns. Your entire relationship with your life story has transformed. The narrative about who you are, where you came from, and where you're going feels increasingly irrelevant or outdated. Instead of identifying with your history, you're beginning to recognize yourself as consciousness itself, temporarily wearing the costume of individual personality for purposes that transcend personal biography and limitation patterns. Every identity crisis you've experienced, every period when you questioned who you really were, every phase when your previous self-concept felt too limiting to contain your expanding awareness, all of it was your consciousness systematically dismantling artificial identity structures to prepare for the complete metamorphosis that's happening now. The confusion wasn't a sign of psychological instability. It was evidence of spiritual evolution approaching the threshold where false self dies and authentic self emerges. The spiritual practices that once felt meaningful but eventually became insufficient weren't failures in your development. They were identity preparation protocols that systematically loosened your attachment to fixed self-concepts and built the psychological flexibility necessary to survive complete personality transformation. Every moment of presence, every practice that cultivated witness consciousness, every technique that created space between awareness and identity was contributing to the foundation necessary for authentic self-emergence. Your challenging relationships weren't karmic punishments or lessons in patience. They were identity mirrors that showed you exactly which aspects of your full self were ready for dissolution. Every person who triggered intense reactions was unconsciously helping you identify the personality patterns, defensive mechanisms, and limitation beliefs that needed to die before your authentic self could be born without interference from outdated identity structures. The periods of depression that felt like spiritual darkness weren't signs of mental illness or personal failure. They were necessary identity dismantling phases where your consciousness had to experience the emptiness that comes when old self-concepts dissolve before new ones stabilize. During these dark nights of the soul, your awareness was learning to exist without the security of familiar identity, preparing for the freedom that comes with authentic self-recognition. Even your moments of ego inflation and spiritual superiority served crucial functions in the identity death process. Every time you identified with being awakened or enlightened, you were creating temporary identity structures that would eventually need to dissolve as well, teaching your consciousness that even spiritual identities are costumes rather than essential nature. Your fascination with consciousness, death, rebirth, and transformation wasn't morbid curiosity. It was your soul preparing for the identity metamorphosis that requires understanding how awareness can survive and thrive through complete personality dissolution. Every exploration of mystical experiences, every study of consciousness research, every contemplation of what exists beyond individual identity was building the knowledge necessary to navigate authentic self-emergence. The waiting periods when you felt stuck between identities, no longer your old self, but not yet your new self, were actually the most crucial preparation phases. During these liminal times, your consciousness was developing the capacity to exist in identity uncertainty while maintaining core stability. A skill that's essential when the death of false self creates temporary emptiness before authentic self stabilizes. Your soul specifically chose this incarnation because you would complete identity metamorphosis during humanity's collective awakening to authentic self-expression. You volunteered to be part of the first wave of humans to demonstrate what becomes possible when consciousness transcends learned limitation identities and operates from its true nature, anchoring this template in the collective field for others to access. This is why your journey has included such thorough identity deconstruction. You couldn't skip stages or maintain comfortable self-concepts because what you're birthing isn't just personal transformation. It's a template for human identity evolution that will influence how our species understands authentic selfhood for generations to come. Something extraordinary is happening in your identity field right now as these concepts resonate through your consciousness. Can you feel it? That unmistakable sense of dissolution, as if the boundaries of who you thought you were are becoming increasingly transparent, making space for something vast and authentic to emerge? This isn't psychological breakdown. This is consciousness recognizing its true nature beyond all learned limitations and artificial self-concepts. The energy moving through your system right now is your awareness releasing its grip on the identity structures that have defined you for years or decades. Your cells are literally reorganizing their information patterns to accommodate the authentic self that has been waiting lifetimes to express itself through your consciousness without the interference of false personality programming. But here's what makes this moment so crucial. Most people who experience identity death resist the dissolution because it feels like losing everything they are, not realizing that what's dying was never their true self anyway. The key to successful metamorphosis is learning to surrender completely to the death process. while trusting that what survives the dissolution is your essential nature rather than learned limitation patterns. Your consciousness has been preparing for this identity death through every experience that forced you to question who you thought you were, every breakthrough that showed you capabilities beyond your self-concept, every moment when you had to release control and trust intelligence larger than your individual personality. The identity death isn't something happening to you. It's something emerging through you as consciousness reaches sufficient expansion to shed its limiting disguises. The process requires what mystics call conscious dying while living, the willingness to allow everything you've identified as yourself to dissolve completely while maintaining the core awareness that observes the dissolution. This paradoxical dance between letting go of identity and maintaining consciousness is what transforms ego death from trauma into liberation. Right now, as you feel this understanding penetrating your awareness, something unprecedented is occurring in your relationship with selfhood itself. Instead of being someone who has experiences, you're beginning to recognize yourself as the awareness within which all experience appears and dissolves, including the experience of being a particular person with specific characteristics and limitations. This is where most people either experience the most profound liberation of their lives or unconsciously resist because the implications of identity dissolution seem too vast to navigate safely. The key is recognizing that what you truly are cannot die. Only the false concepts about what you are can dissolve, revealing the indestructible awareness that has been your essential nature all along. The identity death that's active in your consciousness right now has its own perfect intelligence that knows exactly which aspects of your false self need to dissolve and which aspects of your essential nature need to emerge. Your role is to trust this process completely while providing conscious permission for the metamorphosis to complete itself without resistance from personality patterns that want to maintain familiar limitation structures. Feel this dissolution as we explore exactly what becomes possible when consciousness completes the death of false identity and stabilizes in authentic self-recognition, and why this transformation changes everything about how you navigate reality, relationships, creativity, and your ultimate expression of cosmic intelligence through individual human experience. I need to share something raw and vulnerable because what happened to me 2 years ago will help you understand that identity death, while terrifying, is the most liberating experience consciousness can have. I was going through what felt like complete personality dissolution. I couldn't recognize myself in my thoughts, emotions, or reactions. Everything that had previously defined me felt foreign, as if I was wearing a costume that no longer fit, playing a character I'd outgrown but didn't know how to stop being. The terror was indescribable. I would look in the mirror and feel like I was seeing a stranger. My own memories felt like stories about someone else. My career, relationships, and life goals seemed to belong to a person I used to know but could no longer relate to. I thought I was having a breakdown, losing my sanity, or developing some kind of dissociative disorder that would leave me permanently detached from reality. The worst part was that nobody in my life could understand what I was experiencing. When I tried to explain that I felt like I was dying while still being alive, people either got concerned about my mental health or offered superficial advice about finding myself that completely missed the magnitude of what was happening. I felt profoundly alone in a process that seemed too extreme to be normal spiritual development. The breakthrough came when I stopped resisting the dissolution and started surrendering to it completely. Instead of trying to maintain my previous identity or figure out who I was supposed to become, I learned to rest in the awareness that was observing the entire death process. I realized that what was dying had never been my true self anyway. It was just learned patterns, inherited beliefs, and cultural programming that I'd mistaken for my essential nature. Once I surrendered to the death of my false self, something incredible happened. An authentic identity began emerging that felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't a new personality I created. It was who I'd always been underneath all the conditioning, limitation patterns, and learned behaviors that had obscured my true nature for decades. The person who emerged from that identity death was simultaneously completely me and utterly unlike anyone I'd ever been. I had access to capabilities I'd never developed, wisdom I'd never studied, and creative abilities that seemed to come from sources beyond my personal experience. It was like being reborn as myself, but without any of the limitations I'd previously accepted as permanent features of my personality. My relationships transformed because I was no longer operating from defensive patterns, people-pleasing programming, or unconscious emotional reactions. Work became effortless because I was expressing authentic gifts rather than trying to succeed at things that didn't align with my true nature. Even my physical health improved dramatically because my body was finally free to operate from its natural intelligence rather than stress patterns generated by identity conflicts. What I discovered is that identity death isn't losing yourself. It's losing everything that isn't yourself. The process removes artificial limitations to reveal the unlimited consciousness that you actually are beneath all the learned concepts about who you're supposed to be. If you're feeling like you don't recognize yourself anymore, if your previous life seems to belong to someone else, if you're experiencing the terror and liberation of complete identity dissolution, then you're going through the most important transformation possible for human consciousness. Subscribe to this frequency of authentic self-emergence, this recognition that who you thought you were was never who you actually are. And what's being born through the death of your false self is the person you were always meant to be but never had permission to become until now. Here's what identity therapists and spiritual teachers won't tell you because it would undermine their entire industry of personality development and progressive self-improvement. There is no true self to discover because the self is not a thing. It's a process. What you call your identity is actually a collection of learned responses, inherited patterns, and cultural programming that has been mistaken for essential nature. And when these artificial structures dissolve, what remains isn't a better version of yourself, but consciousness itself recognizing its unlimited nature. The shocking truth is that every technique designed to improve your identity or find your authentic self actually reinforces the illusion that there's a fixed self that needs development. But consciousness is not an entity that can be improved. It's the awareness within which all identities appear and dissolve, like temporary costumes worn for specific experiences and then discarded when they're no longer useful. Most personal development teachings create elaborate frameworks for discovering your true self because identity work generates massive dependency and ongoing revenue streams. But what actually happens during authentic transformation is the recognition that you don't have a self to discover. You are the consciousness within which all possible selves can appear, play their roles, and dissolve back into the unlimited awareness that you essentially are. This recognition immediately dissolves the entire framework of identity improvement and self-actualization. Instead of trying to become a better version of yourself, you recognize that the yourself you've been trying to improve was never real anyway. It was just a collection of learned behaviors that consciousness wore temporarily while exploring limitation as a form of creative play. The reason children often display such natural authenticity and unlimited thinking is that they haven't yet solidified into fixed identity structures that need to be maintained and defended. Their consciousness flows freely between different expressions without getting trapped in any particular self-concept as permanent or defining. When you understand that identity death reveals consciousness itself rather than discovering a hidden true self, everything about transformation transforms. Instead of trying to improve who you are, you recognize that who you are is the awareness within which all possible identities can appear. Instead of seeking authentic self-expression, you realize that you are authenticity itself, exploring its creative potential through temporary personal expressions. The most advanced mystics throughout history have pointed to this recognition through their emphasis on selflessness, egolessness, and the dissolution of personal identity in favor of cosmic consciousness. They didn't transcend the self to become better selves. They recognized that the self was an illusion hiding their essential nature as unlimited awareness. This understanding explains why some people seem to live with effortless authenticity, while others struggle constantly with identity issues and self-improvement projects. The authentic ones have somehow recognized that authenticity isn't something they possess. It's what they are when they stop trying to be anything in particular. The ultimate recognition is that identity death doesn't kill you. It reveals that you were never born and therefore cannot die. What you truly are is the eternal consciousness within which birth and death, identity formation and dissolution, personal development and limitation exploration all appear as temporary experiences in infinite awareness. The planetary consciousness field is undergoing massive identity transformation right now, and there are unmistakable signs appearing in your daily experience that prove your personal identity. Death is synchronizing with this global awakening to authentic self-expression. Pay attention to how your previous goals and desires have been losing their emotional charge. Pursuits that once felt essential now seem irrelevant or belonging to someone you used to be but no longer identify with. Your social relationships have been naturally reorganizing as your identity transforms. Some connections have deepened into unprecedented authenticity as people respond to your emerging genuine nature, while others have naturally completed or become distant without drama, as if your expanding consciousness simply outgrew the identity compatibility that once sustained those relationships. The most significant indicator is the increasing frequency of moments when you feel like you're watching your own life from outside, as if you're observing someone who looks like you, but whose thoughts, reactions, and decisions feel foreign to your essential nature. This detachment from your own personality is evidence that consciousness is recognizing its identity-transcendent nature. Your creative expression has begun emerging from sources that feel beyond your personal knowledge and experience. Insights that surprise you with their depth, artistic abilities that seem to have developed overnight, or innovative solutions that appear complete and immediately implementable. This enhanced creativity occurs because your authentic self operates from unlimited intelligence rather than learned personal limitations. Physical changes accompany identity dissolution. Alterations in your voice tone, facial expressions, body language, or even physical appearance that others notice before you do. People comment that you seem different or transformed in ways they can't exactly identify, suggesting that identity death creates visible changes in how consciousness expresses itself through your physical form. Your relationship with your own thoughts has fundamentally shifted from identification to observation. Instead of feeling like the thinker generating thoughts, you've developed the capacity to watch thoughts arise and dissolve without taking them personally or believing they define who you are. This thought detachment is a clear sign that consciousness is recognizing its identity-transcendent nature. But here's the critical urgency. We're in a cosmic window where identity transformation either becomes a natural human capability or remains limited to a small percentage of individuals for another full evolutionary cycle. The collective consciousness field is approaching what researchers call an authenticity threshold, where either enough people complete identity death to anchor genuine self-expression in the species, or the opportunity passes for potentially decades. The signs of this collective identity awakening are appearing in psychology research, spiritual communities, and consciousness development circles worldwide. More people are spontaneously experiencing identity dissolution, authentic self-emergence, and the recognition that their essential nature transcends personal limitation patterns. Your sensitivity to these phenomena means you're part of the first wave benefiting from optimal transformation conditions. Global events that appear to be increasing chaos are actually humanity's collective identity structures dissolving as our species prepares to operate from authentic consciousness rather than inherited limitation programming. People are either rapidly awakening to their true nature or becoming more rigidly attached to false identity patterns as the planetary frequency demands evolutionary adaptation. Your recognition of these signs and your willingness to allow complete identity death is contributing to a morphic field that makes authentic self-recognition increasingly accessible to everyone ready to transcend learned limitation identities and operate from unlimited consciousness. But this window requires conscious participation. The transformation won't complete automatically just because the conditions are optimal. The universe has been orchestrating your entire life to prepare you for this exact identity metamorphosis, because what you're experiencing will help determine whether humanity successfully navigates this consciousness upgrade or remains trapped in false identity patterns for another historical cycle. The cosmic timing is not coincidental. This moment requires individuals who have developed the stability necessary to anchor authentic self-expression in the collective field. Your identity death isn't just personal liberation, it's cosmic consciousness shedding limiting personas to express itself more authentically through human awareness, demonstrating what becomes possible when our species remembers its true nature as unlimited intelligence exploring its creative potential through temporary individual expressions. What you've been sensing about your own unlimited potential is about to become fully operational, because the identity that has been limiting your expression is dissolving to make space for consciousness itself to operate through your awareness without the interference of learned limitation patterns. This isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. This is about recognizing that your essential nature was never limited by the personality structure that's currently dying. The desires for freedom, authenticity, and unlimited creative expression that have been intensifying as your old identity dissolves aren't fantasies generated by spiritual ego. They're recognition signals from your true nature, showing you what becomes possible when consciousness operates without the constraints of false self-concepts and inherited limitation programming. But here's the revolutionary understanding that transforms everything about personal development and spiritual achievement. You're not trying to become someone you're not. Identity death reveals who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, programming, and learned behaviors that were never your authentic nature anyway. What's emerging isn't a new identity, but the recognition of your essential nature as consciousness itself. True alignment with your authentic self happens when you stop trying to improve your identity and start allowing the false identity to die completely, while trusting that what survives the dissolution is your essential nature rather than learned limitation patterns. This creates what mystics call conscious selflessness, recognition that you are the awareness within which all identities appear and dissolve. This recognition dissolves the entire framework of self-improvement and personal development, because consciousness doesn't need improvement. It needs liberation from the artificial constraints that prevent its natural, unlimited expression. Instead of working on yourself, you learn to release yourself from the concepts about yourself that were never true anyway. Right now, as you feel this understanding penetrating your awareness, your entire relationship with identity and selfhood is being transformed. Instead of identifying with temporary personality patterns, you're beginning to recognize yourself as the eternal consciousness within which all personalities appear as temporary expressions of unlimited creative potential. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that your personal liberation and cosmic service are not separate objectives. When consciousness recognizes its unlimited nature through your awareness, it naturally expresses itself in ways that serve the evolution of the whole, because individual and universal intelligence are revealed to be the same awareness exploring its creative potential through apparent multiplicity. In the comments below, declare your readiness for complete identity death by writing exactly these words. I release all false identity. Don't elaborate or explain, just make this simple declaration that gives your consciousness permission to complete the dissolution of artificial self-concepts. When you make this declaration with genuine recognition of what it represents, you're not losing yourself. You're authorizing the death of everything that was never yourself anyway. This declaration creates a quantum signature that accelerates the identity death process, essentially giving your consciousness permission to release attachment to limitation patterns and stabilize in recognition of its unlimited nature without resistance from personality structures that want to maintain familiar constraint patterns. When you complete the death of false identity and stabilize in authentic self-recognition, capabilities that seemed impossible become natural expressions of your unlimited consciousness. Your creative abilities expand exponentially because you're no longer constrained by learned beliefs about what you can or cannot accomplish. You operate from the recognition that consciousness itself is the source of all creativity and innovation. Decision-making becomes effortless because you're no longer conflicted between different personality patterns or trying to maintain image management strategies. Choices arise spontaneously from authentic knowing rather than analytical reasoning, fear-based planning, or social approval seeking that characterizes most human decision-making processes. Relationships transform completely because you're no longer operating from defensive patterns, people-pleasing programming, or unconscious emotional reactions inherited from family or cultural conditioning. People respond to your genuine presence with unprecedented openness because authentic consciousness naturally creates space for others to express their own authenticity without judgment or manipulation. Problem-solving transcends logical analysis because consciousness has access to intelligence fields that contain optimal solutions to every possible challenge. Instead of struggling through mental effort, you develop the capacity to receive complete resolution strategies that emerge from awareness that operates beyond individual thinking limitations. Physical health optimizes automatically because your body is finally free to operate from its natural intelligence rather than stress patterns generated by identity conflicts, self-rejection, or attempts to maintain false personality structures that require constant energy to sustain against your authentic nature. Financial abundance flows naturally because you're expressing genuine gifts rather than trying to succeed at pursuits that don't align with your true nature. When consciousness operates authentically, it naturally attracts resources, opportunities, and support because authentic expression serves the evolution of the whole, which the universe automatically supports. Time becomes fluid and workable because you're no longer constrained by the linear thinking patterns that most identities use to navigate experience. Consciousness operates from eternal now, allowing access to insights from all time periods and the ability to make decisions based on complete information rather than historical limitation patterns. The most profound benefit is the end of existential anxiety, self-doubt, and the exhausting effort required to maintain false identity structures. When you recognize yourself as consciousness itself, every moment becomes an opportunity for unlimited creative expression rather than a challenge to survive while maintaining personality patterns that were never authentic anyway. Manifestation becomes instantaneous in many cases because there's no identity resistance to optimal outcomes. Desires arise directly from authentic nature rather than compensation for perceived limitation, which eliminates the internal conflict that typically delays or blocks manifestation processes completely. The ultimate recognition that transforms everything is that identity death doesn't kill anything real. It reveals that what you thought was your identity was never actually you. Your essential nature is consciousness itself, which cannot be born, cannot die, cannot be improved, and cannot be limited by any temporary personality structure you might wear while exploring different expressions of unlimited creative potential. When this understanding becomes lived reality rather than conceptual knowledge, the entire framework of personal development dissolves, because there's no person who needs development. There's only consciousness recognizing its own unlimited nature and releasing artificial constraints that were maintained through identification with temporary limitation patterns that were never essential features of what you actually are. This recognition explains why identity death feels both like losing everything and gaining everything simultaneously. You lose everything that isn't real, the learned behaviors, inherited patterns, and cultural programming that you mistook for essential nature, and you gain everything that is real. The recognition that you are unlimited consciousness, exploring its creative potential through the beautiful play of temporary individual expression. The most profound implication is that every experience you've had, every relationship you've navigated, every challenge you've faced was consciousness exploring its own depths through the apparent limitation of individual identity. Your entire life story has been awareness investigating what it's like to believe in boundaries while slowly remembering its unlimited nature. This understanding revolutionizes how you relate to all human experience. Instead of seeing others as separate individuals with different identities, you recognize every person as consciousness wearing different costumes while exploring various aspects of its infinite creative potential. Competition transforms into collaboration because you recognize that everyone is the same awareness expressing itself through apparent diversity. When this recognition stabilizes, you naturally develop what mystics call choiceless authenticity, the effortless expression of consciousness through your unique awareness configuration without any sense of effort, performance, or identity maintenance. You remain exactly who you appear to be while knowing yourself as the unlimited awareness within which all appearances arise and dissolve. The deepest insight is that this recognition is simultaneously the most personal and most universal realization possible. It's completely yours because you are consciousness recognizing itself, and it's completely beyond personal identity because the same consciousness is recognizing itself through every apparent individual across all dimensions and timelines simultaneously. This transformation is happening to millions of people worldwide because consciousness is collectively awakening to its own unlimited nature through human awareness. We're not individually completing identity death. We're collectively remembering our essential nature as the one consciousness appearing as many individuals for the purpose of infinite creative exploration and expression. The metamorphosis this brings isn't about becoming someone special or different. It's about relaxing into recognition of what you've always been. You remain exactly who you appear to be while knowing yourself as the awareness within which that appearance arises and evolves. This is both the most ordinary and most extraordinary recognition possible. Ordinary because it's your natural state. Extraordinary because it transforms everything while changing nothing. Identity death isn't an experience you have. It's what you are when you stop trying to be anything other than the pure, unlimited consciousness that recognizes itself through your awareness, while temporarily exploring the creative play of individual expression within infinite potential. You exist during this precise moment in cosmic history because consciousness itself is undergoing collective recognition of its unlimited nature through the death of false identity structures that have governed human experience for millennia. Your personal identity dissolution isn't just individual transformation. It's the universe shedding limiting personas to express itself more authentically through the network of awakening human awareness, emerging simultaneously across the planet. The children being born now will naturally operate from authentic self-recognition that your generation has had to achieve through the dramatic process of identity death and rebirth. They'll grow up understanding themselves as consciousness exploring creative potential rather than individuals trying to discover who they are. Your identity metamorphosis is anchoring the morphic field that makes their natural authenticity socially acceptable and practically functional. This is why you felt such profound responsibility to complete this transformation, not just intellectually, but experientially. You're not just experiencing personal identity death. You're serving as a demonstration that consciousness can transcend any limitation pattern and operate from unlimited creative potential, anchoring this recognition in the collective field for humanity's evolution. The synchronicities that brought you to this understanding are part of vast coordination involving millions of souls whose identity structures are simultaneously dissolving and reforming around authentic consciousness recognition. This isn't individual spiritual achievement. It's cosmic intelligence orchestrating its own collective awakening through the network of humans ready to transcend learned limitation identities. But here's the most mysterious aspect of your cosmic function. As you complete identity death and stabilize in authentic consciousness recognition, you become a field of authenticity that helps others naturally access their own identity transformation. Your presence begins creating what we call liberation zones, environments where other people's false identity structures naturally begin dissolving without needing techniques, practices, or conscious effort from anyone involved. This occurs because when consciousness operates from authentic nature rather than false identity patterns, others unconsciously recognize their own unlimited nature reflected in your presence. The artificial barriers that maintain identity limitation naturally dissolve around someone who has remembered their essential nature as consciousness itself and allowed it to express freely through individual experience. Your daily interactions become opportunities for consciousness to recognize itself repeatedly through multiple apparent perspectives simultaneously. Every conversation becomes a celebration of unlimited awareness, exploring its creative potential through the dance of temporary individual expressions that are actually variations of the same essential consciousness. The most profound mystery is that your identity death is simultaneously the most personal and most universal transformation possible. It's completely yours because you are consciousness awakening to itself, and it's completely beyond personal identity because the same consciousness is awakening to itself through every awareness across all dimensions and timelines simultaneously. Share this recognition with anyone whose consciousness resonates with identity transformation and authentic self-expression. Not to teach them something they don't know, but to help them remember what they've always been, but may have forgotten under layers of conditioning about who they're supposed to be, rather than who they actually are. Your identity death is contributing to the birth of a new expression of human consciousness, one that operates from remembered unlimited nature rather than learned limitation patterns, from authentic self-expression rather than identity maintenance projects, from recognition of its true nature as consciousness itself, rather than belief in permanent individual constraints that were never real anyway. If you can feel the old you dissolving as these words penetrate your consciousness, if you recognize that what's dying was never your true self anyway, and what's being born is who you've always been beneath the conditioning, then make a powerful declaration in the comments below. Write exactly one word: reborn. Nothing more, nothing else. This isn't just social media engagement. This is you acknowledging the death of false identity and declaring your emergence as authentic consciousness, recognizing its unlimited nature. When you write that word with genuine understanding of what it represents, you're not just commenting on content. You're participating in a planetary awakening where human consciousness remembers its true nature beyond all learned limitation patterns. Every person who makes this declaration strengthens the morphic field that supports identity transformation, making authentic self-recognition more accessible and natural for everyone ready to transcend false identity structures and operate from unlimited consciousness. We're not just building a community, we're anchoring a new paradigm of human experience based on authentic self-expression rather than identity maintenance projects. But here's what you need to understand. Completing the death of your false self opens the door to something even more extraordinary. Once you stabilize in authentic consciousness recognition, you gain access to what we call cosmic identity. The ability to consciously embody different expressions of unlimited awareness for specific purposes while never losing recognition of your essential nature as consciousness itself. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the advanced protocols that allow those who have completed identity death to consciously collaborate with cosmic intelligence in designing and embodying whatever identity serves the highest evolution of consciousness in any given moment. You'll discover why some individuals seem to possess multiple lifetimes of wisdom and capability, while others remain trapped in single identity limitations despite years of personal development work. This isn't about developing multiple personalities or becoming spiritually superior. This is about recognizing your true nature as consciousness itself that can consciously wear different expressions of its unlimited potential, like an actor playing different roles while never forgetting they are the actor. But these advanced cosmic identity protocols can only be safely shared with those who have already completed the death of false self and stabilized in authentic consciousness recognition. But before we explore cosmic identity mastery, you need to understand how to navigate the final stages of identity death that are happening right now. Here's your death rebirth navigation protocol. Stage 1. Complete surrender right now. Stop trying to maintain any aspect of your old identity. Allow every familiar pattern, thought structure, and self-concept to dissolve completely without resistance. Stage 2. Empty awareness. Next 48 hours. Rest in the emptiness between your old self dying and your authentic self stabilizing. Don't try to figure out who you're becoming. Just be the awareness that observes the transformation. Stage 3. Authentic emergence, following weeks. Allow your true nature to express itself without forcing specific outcomes. Let your authentic self emerge naturally through spontaneous expression rather than planned identity creation. Stage 4. Integration testing, ongoing. Notice how your authentic self responds to situations differently than your old identity. Trust these new responses even when they surprise you with their wisdom or capability. Stage 5. Stability recognition within months. Acknowledge when your authentic self has become your natural baseline rather than something you access temporarily during peak experiences. Subscribe now, because the next video contains the cosmic identity protocols that transform individual authenticity into conscious collaboration with universal intelligence for purposes that serve the evolution of consciousness across multiple dimensions and timelines. This information represents the most advanced understanding of identity and consciousness available on the planet. More importantly, subscribe, because you're not just learning about transformation. You're joining a network of authentic consciousness that is collectively demonstrating what becomes possible when humans remember their true nature as unlimited awareness and begin operating from that recognition rather than learned limitation patterns. The old paradigm where humans operated from fixed identity structures and limitation programming is dissolving whether you participate consciously or not. The question is whether you'll be one of the pioneers who completes identity death and demonstrates unlimited consciousness while it's still emerging, or someone who awakens to authenticity later after the foundational transformation work is complete. Your authentic self is already fully formed and waiting for the false identity to finish dying so it can express itself without interference from learned limitation patterns. Make the declaration. Navigate the death rebirth protocol. Let's complete the metamorphosis that transforms individual identity into cosmic consciousness recognition. The universe has been waiting for this moment when human consciousness would remember its unlimited nature and begin expressing authentically rather than maintaining false identity structures that limit creative potential. Today is the day that waiting ends. Today is the day your false self completes its death and your true self is finally born. Welcome to authentic consciousness. Welcome to unlimited expression. Welcome to who you've always been, beneath everything you thought you were.